Welcome to Meetup Live. I am Shilon Win, the Customer Success Manager on the Meetup Pro team at Meetup. Today, I'm joined by special guest, Dr. Marissa Gifranco, author of the New York Times bestseller Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friendships as an Adult. She'll help us understand how attachment styles influence friendships. You'll hear the secrets to forming and maintaining adult friendships, identify characteristics of good friendships, and learn what attachment styles are and how they influence your friendships. And then before we get started, we're going to go over quickly the guidelines and the agenda today. So this event will be recorded, but don't worry, you will not appear on video and your audio will also be muted, so you'll only hear the panelists. The chat for the event will also be turned off, but if you have any questions, please submit them at the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And we also have closed captioning available. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see the live transcription icon and you can select your preference. So we'll start with the introduction and then we'll dive into the fireside chat with Dr. Marissa and then wrap it up with a Q&A session at the end as well. And then to introduce our panelists today, I am very excited to introduce Dr. Marissa Gifranco. Dr. Marissa Gifranco is an enlightening psychologist, international speaker, and author of New York Times bestseller Platonic, How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. She works as a professor at the University of Maryland, writes about friendship for Psychology Today, and has also been featured as a connection expert for major publications such as the New York Times, the Telegraph, and the Vice. All right, so Dr. Marissa, we're going to go ahead and we have a couple questions today I prepared for you. So let's go ahead and dive right into them. First question I want to start off, Dr. Marissa, is can you provide some insight on why you wrote Platonic? What was the correlation between attachment styles and friendships you were observing? And what made you want to share this with the world?
Yeah. So first, just want to say hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be talking to so many people from all over the world. I really feel so honored to be sharing this information with all of you and to have such a great captive audience. So why did I decide to write Platonic? Well, I was going through some breakups in my young 20s and feeling so bad. So I decided to start this wellness group with my friends where we met up to practice wellness and we cooked together, we did yoga, we meditated. But the most healing force of all was really just friendship. It was being around these people that made me feel so safe, who I loved every week. And so that experience really challenged, I think, some of the ways that I had been taught to think about love. I thought romantic love was the only love that makes me worthy. I thought it's the only love that really matters. And that if I don't have a romantic partner in my life, I don't have any love at all. And so I looked at my friends and I was like, this feels like love to me. Like, why doesn't this count as love? And when it comes to friendship, sometimes it feels like there's like gold under our feet, but we see it as concrete because we just don't value friendships enough. And I really felt like I was, the personal is political, as Audre Lorde shares, that my experiences kind of reflected a larger cultural trend about putting such a hierarchy on love and putting platonic love at the top of that hierarchy. And so I wondered, what would our world be like if we didn't do that? What would our world be like for people who are single and for people that are in relationships and divest from friendship because of that? The attachment theory piece came later. I was digging into the research on connection every single day. And what I began to find was that how we've connected has fundamentally shaped who we are, right? Like whether we are friendly, warm, cynical, trusting, outgoing, these empathic, generous, like all of these factors are predicted by how our connection experiences have been in the past, right? It's shaped our personality. But not only that, who we are affects how we connect. So people that have experienced those close, nourishing relationships are better at connecting in the future. They, come to their new relationships with a set of assumptions that really help them continue to connect. They think people will like them. They think people are trustworthy. They think they can be, vulnerable around other people, right? So the idea behind Platonic, the thesis is how we've connected affects who we are, but then who we are affects how we connect, right? And that, it turns out, when my editor pointed out to me, is the same thesis behind attachment theory, right? Like, we've gone through these experiences in our early childhood and then kind of evolving from there. And there's also a genetic component that have really shaped us. It's shaped our personalities into, in some ways, a bunch of coping mechanisms that prepare us to engage in relationships that our bodies are assuming will be similar to our more foundational relationships. So, and that really impacts our ability to connect with other people, and we don't often realize it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's so great. It's so interesting, in those early 20s and 30s when we're still navigating that. So yeah, thank you for that. And another question I have for you is, can you give us a basic overview of how attachment styles really impact your friendships?
Yeah. So when I talked about the people that have had this healthy, positive relationships in the past, they walk around the world with a set of assumptions about how people are relating to them. And because human connection is rife with ambiguity, right? Rarely are people like, I really don't like you, or I really love you. Basically, our attachment shapes how we interpret ambiguity. So we can interpret the very similar events differently based on our own past, based on our own attachment history. So in the attachment chapter of Platonic, I talk about studies that find that, when kids are asked to read a story about a friend who comes close to them and spills milk on them, how do they interpret that experience? The securely attached kids were like, oh, that was an accident. Like, my friend wants the best for me. Like, it's fine. They are just clumsy. But the insecurely attached kids were like, my friend is trying to humiliate me. They are trying to harm me. And not only that, that interpretation led them to want to seek revenge on their friend, which is like more likely when you're insecurely attached, you feel rejected. So you want to reject other people, right? And so fundamentally, the securely attached people, what you'll see in their friendships is that they assume people like them. They're comfortable being vulnerable, but they modulate their vulnerability based on the vulnerability of the other person. They're quite flexible. They tend to be the most pro-social, which kind of means kind. They're the most generous attachment style, the most empathic attachment style. They can be like really validating friends, for example. But not only that, like it extends to a lot of things outside of connection, because like, for example, like securely attached people have better like mental health, less lonely, better physical health, are less prejudiced, better stress regulation, lower blood pressure in reaction to like stressful events, which shows that like basically, interpersonal theory, according to psychology, is that like our mental health issues are our connection issues, right? Like basically like these people that are carrying around this internal sense that I am loved, right? They are a lot less prone to mental health issues, right? A lot less prone to issues like depression and anxiety. It's such a source of resilience as you're navigating the world. Whereas anxiously attached people, what you'll see in their friendships is that they tend to try to make them move very rapidly, very quickly, because their core fear is that they will be abandoned. So when you hear about like trauma bonds, like they tend to be very self-sacrificing, very concerned about how the other person is doing, and less concerned about how they're doing themselves. They tend to be attracted to relationships with people that pull away. And when people pull away, they work harder. Whereas a secure person, if someone pulls away, you walk away and you find other people that actually do value you. They tend to ignore conflict and withdraw, whereas secure people will address conflict in their friendships. And they tend to put a lot of effort into friendships, but their friendships tend to be fragile and more volatile, right? And that's because anxiously attached people, they just read that they're being rejected a lot, even when they're not, right? So their friend takes a while to respond to them. If this isn't a trend, a chronic issue, and nothing has happened, a secure person will just be like, they're probably busy, whereas anxiously attached person will be like, they rejected me, they don't like me, and then they won't reach out back. That revenge piece that tends to happen. Whereas then you have the avoidantly attached people who they are very scared of intimacy. They have learned that they can't trust people and that they have to handle everything on their own. So they tend to be hyper independent. When it comes to friendships, they are low effort, low reward. They don't really initiate as much. They're definitely not as vulnerable. When other people are as vulnerable, they're uncomfortable. Whereas for secure and anxious, if you're vulnerable with them, they tend to like you more. Not true for avoidant people. If you ever been vulnerable with someone, you're like, why do they respond all weirdly? That may be their own attachment. They withdraw in times of conflict. Really, a lot of the times, avoidantly attached people, and I think insecurely attached people, but particularly avoidant, they're thinking about their own needs and their own discomforts, and they're not thinking about the impact on other people as much. Whereas sometimes anxiously attached people think too much about other people and not enough about themselves. Whereas the securely attached people, they're kind of weighing the needs of people that are very close to them and themselves relatively equally and in a very balanced way.
Yeah, thank you for touching on all those different attachment styles, and what those look like in those different types of friendships. How can we identify which attachment style we have and in those friendships?
Yeah. So what do your friendships look like? Do you have few friends and you feel like, or even if you have a lot of friends, but you feel like they don't really know you, right? You're not really like authentic with them. You're never like vulnerable with them. Like you can hang out, but you don't actually know me. Like, and if I'm in a time where I need support or going through something difficult, my friends won't really know. You might be more avoidantly attached, right? Like people see you as like an enigma, of sorts. And there are avoidantly attached people who have large groups of friends, but they just tend to be more shallow because, again, avoidantly attached people really don't trust other people. Anxiously attached people, you might have a lot of friends and they just feel like more fragile. Like your friends come and go more, like there's not as much continuity in your friendships. You maybe expect a lot of your friends because again, you fear other people are going to abandon you. So you might always try to get friends to like prove to you that they won't abandon you. So for example, I talk about in the book how anxiously attached woman got angry at her friend for not showing up for her recital because that friend was sick, right? So it's taking things very personally and not considering the larger situation and the other person's kind of larger experience. So you have close friendships, but they feel like less fragile. They feel more fragile to you. Whereas securely attached people, you have close friendships. They've endured over time. You're able to like work through conflict with friends. You're like pretty generous to your friends. You're really thinking about their needs and your own needs. And I call them super friends, like a lot of different outcomes when it comes to connection, like secure people are doing really well. But I just wanted to mention this caveat because I think people hear this and they're like, good for those people with great childhoods, I guess, like screw me. And I just want to say like, that's totally not the case. You can absolutely change your attachment style. Even learning about attachment theory, the research finds helps people change their attachment style. So your attachment, if you feel like, oh, I see myself in the avoidance, I see myself in the anxious, that it's great that you're here because that means you're already trying to take steps to understand how you can better connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question for you, Dr. Marissa, is it possible to, have multiple different attachment styles that we possess?
Yes. So it's just like a funny person, right? Some people, they'll be funny. Around some people, they'll be funny. Around some people, they'll be less funny, right? Like any sort of characteristic, we have a part of it that's like our personality and a part of it that the situation brings out of us. It's called like state versus trait, right? Like, is it because of the state you're in, or is this a trait to your personality? And the same is true about attachment styles. We tend to have a sort of attachment style more generally, right? But the situation will really alter our attachment style because if you're in a relationship with someone who's avoidant and they're constantly pulling away and withdrawing from you, it's natural to feel a bit anxious, right? Like, oh my gosh, I'm afraid they're going to abandon me because they actually might. And if you're in a situation with someone who is always demanding that you prove to them just how much you like them, you might be like, I need to pull away. Like I'm a little bit overwhelmed here, right? And so we do have this general attachment style, but it really can shift based on the situation. And, I think Attached by Amir Levine, another book about attachment theory, he talks about how like when we're in a relationship with people that make us feel secure, we tend to become more secure, that you're only as needy as your unmet needs are.
Gotcha. And then just a follow-up question I have as well is, how do you think that personality impacts that attachment style that we have?
Yeah, so funny, the research finds that there is a genetic component to attachment. So like your temperament, like there could be an infant that seems like they're born really reactive and like very overstimulated, right? That might overlap with some things like anxious attachment style. But your attachment style fundamentally, like in some ways, it is your personality. Like it's part of your personality, right? I mean, a lot of our personality is kind of like coping mechanisms in some ways, right? Like, so if you're anxiously attached, you might be like someone who's very vulnerable. You might be someone who's like kind of warm towards others. You might be someone that can be a little bit reactive in your friendships. You might be someone who feels like you're being very generous, but that can also be a coping mechanism to keep people from abandoning you, and feels like very, very loving. And I think those things are also true, but they can also be sort of like coping mechanisms. And you like to share a lot of things about yourself. You like to hear, have other people share a lot of things about you. Like you really love intimacy. Like that's great, a great part of being anxious. Whereas if you're avoidant, your personality, you're very self-sufficient, right? You're always trying to come off as, I guess, like a little bit like superior in your connections with other people. You can do a lot of things on your own. You're very independent. You tend to be more cynical. You tend to be a little bit more mistrusting of other people. And if you're secure, you're going to see things that like secure people, they just feel safe all the time. So it's like who you are when you feel most safe is like who you are when you're secure. So you're going to be like playful. You're going to be very loving towards others. You're going to be more like calm. You're going to come off as like more balanced. You're going to come off as like friendly and warm, again, because your internal working model, which is basically like your internal template, is telling you that other people love you. So that, our personalities are really shaped by our experiences of connection or lack thereof.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Thank you. And with that, do you think our styles, really differ in intimate relationships versus friendships, how we are attached?
They can. Like there's something called like your global attachment style, which influences how you experience friendships and how you experience romantic relationships, right? And the styles can certainly differ. Like I've definitely seen people that are more secure in their romantic relationship and insecure in their friends, and vice versa. I think there's been a lot of talk about attachment style in romantic relationships because, right, your attachment style kind of formed with your caregivers or your parents, and the romantic relationship kind of script tends to reflect almost like a parenting relationship, like two people that are kind of engaged in this really intimate relationship, and friendship just tends to be more dispersed. That being said, I tend to really see like more of the extremes come out in terms of attachment style and friendship when it's more of a romantic friendship. So I differentiate, this is based off of scholarship from Angela Chen, Asexual Communities. There's a difference between being romantically attracted to someone and sexually attracted to someone. Sexual attraction is I want to have sex with you. Romantic attraction is like, I idealize you. I think you're amazing. Want to spend all my time with you. You thrill me. I yearn for you, right? And a lot of people experience this in their friendship. Historically, romance has been more a part of friendship than it has been marriage, right? And so what that means is, particularly when we experience these friends that we feel like you're like my soulmate and I want to do everything with you, that can kind of pull out some attachment issues might come to the forefront too.
Wow, that's so interesting, all the different styles, especially when you're looking at relationships versus friendships. Um, do you think that attachment styles look different depending on gender?
Yeah, so meta-analyses that have combined all of the existing research out there basically find that men are more likely to be avoidantly attached and women are more likely to be anxiously attached. Of course, I don't think this is a large effect. There's a lot of exceptions to that rule, but the ways that we condition men are, and this is coming from a US centric or maybe even Western world centric perspective, that men have to be independent. They have to be strong. They have to be anchors. They can't be vulnerable. They can't cry. That sounds a lot like avoidant attachment, right? Whereas woman, you have to be you have to like put yourself second and think about nurturing everyone else around you instead of yourself. And you're so focused on your relationships, and like that sounds a lot like anxious attachment. So I think, I've heard the quote that like, yeah, we think about our family for how we've become who we are, but the society is the family of the family. So it's like the family is shaped by the society and the family shapes us.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that as, we evolve and grow, that our attachment styles also change as we mature?
They do. So the research finds that good news, as we get older, we tend to become more secure. So that's great. And also, like, if you find a secure relationship, it could be a friendship too. Like, that'll help make you more secure over time too. So again, like, there's some research that also finds that your attachment style is more likely to change than it is to stay the same too. So there certainly can be a lot of movement. I think especially for people that are very aware of attachment theory and really working on it, because fundamentally, what is attachment? It's an algorithm. It's a set of expectations that you have that has become deeply ingrained in your body. It's a set of if-then statements, right? Like avoidant. What are your if-then statements? Like, if I'm vulnerable, people will betray me. If I ask for support, people will think I'm weak, right? Like anxious. If I need you, you won't be there. If I try to get close to you, you will abandon me, right? Secure. Like, if I try to get close to you, you'll want to be close to me. Like, if I need you, you're going to be there, right? It's just a set of expectations. And so if we can recognize those expectations and we can try to develop more secure expectations, like, oh, I'm going to assume that they like me. I'm going to assume that we can develop intimacy, right? I'm going to, it's almost these positive, hopeful, optimistic assumptions that really define the secure attachment style, right? I can practice that. I can keep reminding myself of that. And eventually it's going to kind of trickle into my body and how my body experiences relationships and the stress or lack thereof that might come up.
Yeah. Going with that, how do you think that your specific environment really affects that attachment style?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, the other person's attachment is also a dynamic. So if you're, a secure person, even in a relationship with someone who's super avoidant, you're going to feel a little insecure. I don't think attachment is not categorical. It's very much a spectrum that you can sort of shift on that spectrum depending on the attachment style of the people around you. I think the issue is that, so anxiously attached people have learned that they need to earn love. So they tend to be attracted to people that pull away. And that is obviously really unhealthy in the long run because you're inviting relationships with people in your life that are not from people that are not invested in you, right? And so in some ways, it's like your assumptions are what's harming you, but what's also harming you is that those assumptions fundamentally lead you to engage in relationships with people that are then going to reflect those assumptions. Whereas avoidantly attached people, you'll hear them say like, I have walls, but why doesn't somebody come and try to like step over my walls, right? Which means you're asking for someone who's avoidantly attached in your life because a securely attached person will come up against your walls and be like, oh, whoa, like you have a lot of walls up and I want to be in relationship with people that can be in relationship with me. Right. Or I want to respect your boundaries even. And so I'm going to try to find a different relationship. Whereas, the anxious person will be like, well, you have walls. It's time for me to try to bulldoze through them. Right. So you're almost in some ways as the avoidant person might also be inviting relationships because like you're not putting in a lot of effort. So only the people that put in this high effort and aren't like pulled away or repelled by a lack of reciprocity are going to end up penetrating you. And so I think that's the difficulties with attachment is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, both because whatever your attachment is what you are going to see in the world. Like for me, like, for example, I used to be more anxiously attached. If someone didn't respond to my text message, I would have such a strong physiological reaction. And when they eventually responded to me, it disproved my assumption that they were, abandoning me, right? But what was my memory of that experience? It was all of the time I spent in that physiological reactivity. So even though this person was, being responsive to me, my memory of it wasn't that way. That's how the confirmation bias plays out, where we continue to see in the world whatever is within us internally.
Yeah, thank you for that example. That's awesome. When we realize our attachment style and, say we do have that anxious attachment, how do we, work to manage it to develop these, stronger and healthier friendships and relationships, whether that's anxious, and whatnot?
Yeah. So anxious or avoidant, fundamentally, you're experiencing relationships as unsafe terrain. And so we want to get you back to experiencing relationships as a place of safety. One of the big tips that I share for making and keeping friends is to assume people like you. And again, just like we've been talking about the self-fulfilling prophecy, people that are high in rejection sensitivity, which means they tend to think they're being rejected even when they're not. So anxiously attached people, yes, and somewhat avoidantly attached people. What happens is when they report that people that they're connected to have reactions like they're quieter than usual, right? They'll actually then reject people and they'll be they'll be subdued. They won't respond, be sort of cold towards other people. So when we assume rejection, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then there's this theory called hypervigilance for social threat hypothesis, which is like, basically the more we think we're being rejected, the poorer our relationships are going to be, because when we think we're being rejected, it triggers behaviors in us that are more antisocial. Whereas when we think we're being accepted, it triggers behaviors in us that tend to create relationships. So back to this idea of the acceptance prophecy, when researchers told people, you're going to go into this group and based on your personality profile, you're going to be accepted. This was absolutely not true. They completely lied to people. But when people thought this way, they actually went out into the group and they were friendlier and they were more open, right? So when we assume we'll be liked, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I think we should try to go into the whenever I'm going into a new interaction, I like to think about, we're on the same team. That's what I tell myself. Or you could tell yourself, like, may I remind myself to assume that they like me, right? And that's really going to change your resulting interaction. But how we make this a practice, really, and this has been so helpful for me. There's this psychologist, Rick Hansen, and he studies like basically really internalizing positive experience. And he has this whole framework called the HEAL framework, which is, I'll just share the first 3 steps because they're the most relevant here, that you have a beneficial experience, you enrich it, and you absorb it. So enriching looks like you focus on that positive experience until it stirs an emotion in you, like that joy, that, feeling of safety, feeling of groundedness. And then you enrich it, then you absorb it, which means you kind of visualize that experience melting into your body. And so for those of us that are insecurely attached, we can practice HEAL by savoring moments of safety. It can be as small as, oh, someone smiled at me. Someone held the door for me. Someone became animated in conversation with me, right? Someone seemed interested in talking to me, right? Someone's sharing something about themselves with me, right? These are these experiences that we, especially when we're insecurely attached, we just let them pass us by because we're just looking for the sign that they're doing the opposite, right? But they're showing us in all of these tiny ways that they do like and accept us. And the thing is that if we're insecurely attached, we don't actually like receive it. So we need to practice savoring experiences of social safety. Like if someone smiles at you, like look at that smile and focus on it until you like literally feel the impact of that acceptance in your body, until you literally feel an emotion, right? And then you picture that, like that acceptance kind of becoming part of your body. Like it's going to be a practice. And Rick Hansen says that what is state becomes trait, which means when we practice something, it eventually becomes part of our personality and who we are, right? So when you're insecurely attached, you're hypervigilant for rejection and threat. But when you practice savoring moments of social safety and positivity and acceptance, eventually your brain starts to look out for those experiences instead of looking out for those threatening experiences. So it's a powerful medium for getting to a place where you begin to assume that people like you.
Yeah, those are awesome tips. With that, Dr. Marissa, do you have any, tips or advice on how those with anxious or avoidant attachment styles can help, those that they are in friendships with secure people understand their attachment style or why they have those styles?
So I think about this, that triggers are the opposite of love, because when someone triggers you, you tend to reduce them to a single act, right? Becomes their whole personality, what they did to trigger you. Whereas loving someone is perceiving them so expansively for who they are and really being able to see someone for like, and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Whereas triggers are, I'm gonna not give you the benefit of the doubt. You triggered me, so I'm going to cut you out, right? And in some ways, it just requires us to take responsibility for our triggers, right? Just because someone triggered you, that doesn't mean they did something wrong. Like that's that projection piece, which is like, you made me feel uncomfortable, so you're bad, right? So for anxiously attached people, that'll look like if someone expresses like autonomy in some ways. Anxiously attached people can be very triggered by that, right? Like, I'm sorry, I can't hang out with you today because I really need to focus on my work, right? That's a reasonable thing to do, but anxiously attached person can be very triggered by being turned down because that wound around abandonment. And so it takes you being able to, instead of being like, you're a bad friend, you're rejecting me, now I'm going to, react and not hang out with you. And, for you to actually like sit with that trigger, like, oh man, I feel rejected. Like, where do I feel that in my body? It feels uncomfortable for me. I'm just actually going to let myself like feel this emotion instead of trying to use these defense mechanisms to coddle this feeling and protect myself from this feeling. The defense mechanism is, well, I don't want to hang out with you then, or now I'm not going to respond to you, or let me try to tell you, like, you have to hang out with me. Like, are you going to hang out with me tomorrow? Are you going to hang out with me? Right? Like, instead, just let yourself feel that feeling so you don't have to act out to try to protect yourself from that feeling. Right? Similarly, like avoidantly attached people triggered like things like other people being vulnerable or triggered by things like other people having needs at all, right? And so you recognizing just because that triggered me doesn't mean people are wrong for having a need from me, right? Or for being vulnerable around me or having any expectation of me at all, right? Because I perceive it as pressure and suffocating if I'm avoidantly attached. So it's you being able to sit with that trigger and say, I feel angry, I feel frustrated by this experience, but I also know that they're not inherently wrong. And that's like part of my own like attachment stuff that I have to work out. Right. So it's this trigger consciousness, I think, that happens that really helps us become more secure instead of my triggers are your responsibility. Right. And so I think if we can all be more vulnerable, right, that we can be more secure, right? Because secure people, they're going to express the emotion that's underneath that trigger instead acting out in ways that coddle the feeling that's underneath that trigger. So, if you're anxious and you know that, other people are you think other people are rejecting you, it can, you can sort of share that. Like, sometimes I really struggle with like feeling rejected. It makes me really happy if you do XYZ. Like, would you be open to that? Right. Um, or avoidantly attached people can say like, sometimes I'm someone who tends to really need my own space. And I know that sometimes that can feel very isolating for other people. So is there a way that I can, take my space while also making you feel secure, making you feel reassured, right? Like it's being able to share your liabilities, and be conscious of them so that they don't lead to derailing and sabotaging the relationship to coddle those liabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. For newer friendships, how do you think, you should approach attachment styles as a whole? If you are an avoidant person or anxious person, how do you have any suggestions on how to go about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, being friends with secure people helps all of us. But what does that look like? Because, anxious, it's being friends with people that seem invested in us too, right? And fundamentally, as an anxious or an avoidant person, you actually have different needs in your friendships, right? Like as an anxiously attached person, you might need a friendship who's particularly like affectionate, right? Because you need that reassurance, right? And you may struggle with people that aren't as affectionate, that seem more closed off, right? And that's okay, right? And avoidantly attached people, you might need people that are around you that like really can respect that you're a very independent person and not put as much pressure on you. And I think it's okay to like really try to cultivate those types of friends. Of course, like securely attached people will do both because secure people are, they have a lot of flexibility in meeting people's needs. And so that's really, really great. But I also don't want us to like turn attachment into a stereotype where we're just like, well, now that I know that you're anxious or avoidant, I just can't be your friend because I just think that you're gonna, do XYZ, right? Because we're all more complex than our attachment style as well. And so I think we also need to just remember that like people are more complex in their attachment style. And even if we're like, oh, I don't want to be friends with someone who's avoidant, we might meet someone who's like, we love a lot of other things about them, even if we struggle with the part of them that tends to like disengage more. And I think it's about like in general, when we're building relationships, like looking at the larger pros and cons of a person. It's not that we're going to be friends with people that have no flaws, but it's like you have these flaws, but there's also these things that I really love about you. So I'm going to be in community with you. So I think it's also important to like, I don't know, still see people as people, but in some ways, like if you know your friend's attachment style, you know how to love them better, right? Like if I have an anxiously attached friend, I'm going to try to reassure them and tell them, hey, I can't hang out today, but I just wanted to let you know, I really appreciate you reaching out and it's really great to hear from you. Or if I have an avoidantly attached friend, I know if they are suddenly backing away, I'm like, okay, I'm not taking that personally. Like, I know you need your space and that's really important to you. So, and that's what makes you feel loved when someone doesn't pressure you when you need your space. So, I think we can, instead of using it to judge people, like use it to love people, because that's how we heal. That's how we heal people with insecure attachment. It's through love and not judgment.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think there are certain attachment styles that, work better together with friendships?
Well, everybody basically works better with secure people. You tend to see anxious and avoidant pairings because, right, like I said, if a person's very avoidant and isn't really fulfilling your needs and is kind of withdrawing, and when you're intimate with them, they pull away. Like secure people will tend to find someone else, whereas anxious people will be like, that's exactly what I've been taught about love, that I need to earn it and that I need to force you to love me. So game on, challenge accepted. So, we tend to be almost attracted to these connections that are going to wound us again. And so, I think we can be cognizant about that fundamentally, like if a friendship is consistently making you feel bad, that is a sign that it's not a great friendship for you to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And friendship is a two-way street. So let's say, what if you have identified your attachment style and you're working to understand it and how it impacts your friendship, but say it's not being reciprocated by, the other party. How do
Yeah.
you encourage your friend, to work on the friendship as well? What are your thoughts and tips on that?
I really think about this in reaction to like conflict in friendship. Most of us don't address conflict in friendship. Well, many of us, we just back away, right? But the secure thing to do is be like, hey, this actually hurt my feelings. And I share this because I want to stay close to you. And I hope we can work it out instead of just backing away, right? But conflict really reveals someone's attachment style. It really, really, because attachment styles are really revealed in times of stress. So conflict is that time of stress, right? So I have some friends who are able to say, thank you so much for telling me. I definitely don't want you to feel that way. Other friends who are just like, you're wrong, you're being sensitive, other friends who are just like withdrawing, can't even handle that conversation. And, I think fundamentally, the beauty about friendship is that it's not an either or thing. Like if there's something you struggle with in a friend, you can turn the dial down on the intimacy. You don't have to be like, okay, you can't fulfill this need, so you're not my friend anymore. The beauty of friendship is that we get needs fulfilled by different people. It's not all from one person, right? So if someone doesn't fulfill a certain need, we can look for that need from other person. If someone doesn't feel a need that we require for like our closest level of intimacy, we maybe move them down to our second level of intimacy, right? We don't necessarily have to like end the friendship. For me, I know that those friendships where we can have that conflict conversation, like Virginia Goldner, she's a psychoanalyst. She talks about dynamic safety versus comfortable safety. Comfortable safety happens in our relationships when we feel close because we pretend there's never any issues between us. Dynamic safety happens when we feel close because we've ruptured and repaired and ruptured and repaired. And over time, we end up feeling like there's a deeper level of intimacy because of that, because we don't have to pretend. There's a precedent that if problems come up, we can actually address them. We don't have to back away, right? And so being able to access that dynamic safety is really beautiful. But with some friends, it will be more comfortable safety.
Yeah, when you mention, when you're having a confrontation, for example, and the other party does say, you are being oversensitive or you're being too sensitive, how would you go about that? Them
Yeah,
saying,
I would say like, I hear that you perceive it that way, but this is actually really important for me. So maybe you can share like how my words are impacting you rather than make judgments on me.
yeah, that's awesome. And then, when you touched on this as well, but when we do realize that, that friendship is, no longer serving us in the way that, is good and healthy for us, and there is that conflict within the friendship, how do we positively move through that?
Yeah. So if you realize a friendship, you want to leave the friendship. Well, the first thing is friendships ebb and flow. So that means there may be periods of your friendship where you're like, we're not as compatible. And then there you become very compatible again. Like I have a friend who went through a lot of trauma and became very rarely ever vulnerable. And like part of her that was very kind was kind of pushed away. But, she went through her own process of healing, and now she's back to being very empathic and a lot more vulnerable and admitting of her sensitivities. Right. And I'm glad that I stuck that out. And so I think that's important to think about, right? Like just because you're struggling in this chapter, that doesn't mean you're struggling in the whole book. But sometimes you look back and you're like, nah, this whole book has been a struggle. Every chapter has been a struggle, right? And maybe that's the sign that, oh, this is actually a sign to end the friendship, right? And if that person seems to not want to be friends with you and you don't want to be friends with them, right, you can just kind of let it be. But if there's a friend you're close to who wants to be friends with you, but you no longer want to be their friend, you have to have that conversation, because it's cruel if you don't. Like you trigger something called ambiguous loss, which means that people grieve twice as hard because they don't have closure, right? You're foregoing the discomfort to make the other person feel doubly uncomfortable, right? If you don't have that conversation with them. But the other thing is like, and then I think when you have that conversation, realizing that even in this ending, we can be loving, right? So using I statements, creating what's called a commemorative friendship, which is sharing the things that you did love about that person. So like, hey, I'm realizing that like we're not compatible anymore in like these values. And so I'm not necessarily feeling like I can be as authentic in this friendship, and so I don't think it's working for me. At the same time, like I want to share that like there's a lot of parts of this friendships that were awesome. And I've learned XYZ from you. And I've grown in this way from being your friend. And, I don't think that this relationship will work going forward, but I also just like wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that too, right? Like just because we're in conflict doesn't mean it needs to be me versus you. It can be us. Us is not working, not you suck and I'm the best.
Yeah, definitely. And Dr. Marissa, how do you apply the research on friendship to your own life?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the stuff I've shared today, right? That being secure is like assuming people like you. There's research that finds that we're less likely to be rejected than we think. When strangers interact and predict how liked they are, they underestimate how liked they are by other people. So when I went to Mexico City, I was traveling alone. I was like, I'm gonna have to make some friends. I went to this coffee shop, heard someone speaking American English, asked him like, "Oh, where are you from?" Because from the research that transitioners, people that are like traveling or just got out of a relationship or just moved or just retired or just started school, they tend to be really open to friendship. So I'm like, "Oh, a transitioner. I should get in there." So we talked, and again, assuming he likes me, assuming that he's less likely to reject me than I think, I invited him to a language event that night through Meetup. And at that Meetup event, I met other people, and I was like, "Oh, do you want to go to this wrestling match, Lucha Libre, together?" And everybody pretty much said yes. I think the other thing I assumed is that friendship doesn't happen organically. It does not in adulthood. That's the way of thinking is actually linked to being more lonely over time. Whereas people that see friendship as happening based on effort are less lonely over time. So I knew that I would have to try if I wanted to make friends while I traveled. And I met people in my Spanish class, and I asked them to lunch after, and I also asked them to Lucha Libre. The assuming people like you thing really helps. The other thing is realizing that people like people that they think like them. It's called the theory of inferred attraction. So people that are really good at making friends, right? I used to think it was about being charismatic or funny or smart, right? But the number one quality people report wanting in another person is someone who makes them feel loved and valued and like they matter, right? So when I'm interacting with people, trying to show affection and tell them, "Oh, I really like this about you," or "It's so great to talk to you," and like just show a lot of appreciation for other people, I think that's what makes people pretty open to connecting with me. And so all five of us, maybe six, went to that wrestling match together. And I was only there for a week, but I had made these six new acquaintance friends. And it was, I don't know, it was really cool to see like the research and fruition, like, oh wow, this is a lot easier than our scared brain makes it out for us to be, for things to be.
Yeah, that's awesome, Dr. Marissa. Thank you so much for, sharing all this discussion and sharing all these, tips as well. Super helpful. Dr. Marissa, to wrap it up, can you tell the audience and let them know how they can find your book, how they can follow you?
Yes. So if you want to hear more tips on friendship, I am on Instagram at Dr. Marissa Gifranco, which I think we are also posting this in the chat. So that's DrMarisa Gifranco. I think that's also my name. And I also have a quiz on my website, drmarissagifranco.com. You can take a quiz that assesses your strengths and your weaknesses as a friend and gives you suggestions on how to improve. You can also reach out on my website. I do speaking engagements on how to find belonging at work or how to make friends more generally. So you can reach out there. And then I think the place where you're going to find the biggest treasure trove of tips is my book, Platonic, which is all about how you can become more secure in your friendships. It's available in the US and in the UK, and we have links to that in the chat.
Yes, everyone, please go check out Dr. Marissa's Platonic book. Check her out on Instagram. Everything will be dropped in the chat. Emily's dropping them in the chat, so please go check her out. And then we're going to move into our Q&A session right now. So thank you everyone who popped their questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and start with a couple for Dr. Marissa. So this is from Anonymous. How do you go from an anxious attachment style to a secure attachment style?
Yeah. So I shared some practices today, like assuming people like you, like the HEAL framework where you savor experiences of social safety. I also shared like being friends with people that are more secure instead of trying to chase down people that aren't as interested in friendship with you. I think what I can also share is like, if you're anxiously attached, right? There's this theory called internal family systems theory. I love this theory. It's basically the idea that like we have a family of people inside of us, right? And some of those people, those selves were created in reaction to like traumatic experiences that we've been through. But we also have a highest self. Like our highest self is like connected, grounded, compassionate, right? And this is like part of the sort of like reparenting thing in psychology too, that like if you sort of are able to access your highest self, we all have a secure self inside of us, right? And take a moment when you're in distress to be like locating, where's my secure self feel like in my body, and to start like treating yourself internally like a securely attached person has been treated. So if you're anxiously attached, your internal dialogue is probably pretty mean. It's telling you you're too much, right? People don't like you, right? Beginning to have a more secure, accessing that higher self in the ways that you talk to yourself, which is like, it's okay that you're upset. It's okay that you're in distress. Like, I'm here with you. Like, this is like, if you have multiple selves, you can start supporting yourself in that way, right? There's even like meditations around like visualizing that secure side of you, speaking to that anxious side of you and being very loving towards it, right? So it's like thinking about like we have multiple selves inside of us, not just an insecure self, right? And it's sort of like even in your body, right? For you to be alive, even if you're sick, most of you is healthy, right? Like literally for you to be alive. So similarly, like even psychologically, even if parts of you are insecure, there is a part of you that's secure. Like actually experiencing that, where is that part of you that's secure in your body? And when your insecure side comes up, treating it like a secure, loving person would, like not invalidating yourself, not telling yourself you're too much. And like, really, it's just about too, like, if you're anxious, there's a lot of feelings that you have that you feel kind of afraid to feel. So that's why you try to control people around you, because you try to get them to regulate your emotions for you. But actually, if you like pause and be like, let me just like close my eyes and actually like feel these feelings, like lean into them. Where am I feeling them in my body? Like, is it my chest opening? Is it my throat opening? And like, let me actually like spend a couple of minutes even just like feeling like that, those feelings, and also like bringing the secure love to like all the different emotions that I'm going through. Like you can be your own healing force internally. Like you can internally treat yourself with the security that you haven't been treated with in the past.
Yeah. And then new question from Maxine. Thank you so much for this. Do you think this era of texting versus talking has created a larger number of people with avoidant attachment?
Yeah, I think funny, there is some research on how your attachment style affects your texting style, right? Like avoidantly attached person will only text you once a day. And then you might try to respond to them right away. And they still text you once a day because they're like too much intimacy. Whereas the anxiously attached person will send you multiple texts and you're like, okay, like, let me just like give me a chance to respond. And like I said, like that our attachment styles are triggered in stress, but they're also triggered in ambiguity when we don't have enough information and we're just like filling in the gaps, right? And so texting is like such an ambiguous situation. Like, did you die? Are you eating? Are you like busy? Do you hate me? Like, I just really do not know, right? And so what we assume in these situations is just like our attachment style materializing, right? Like the anxious person, you hate me. The avoidant person, I don't care if you don't respond to me, right? I pretend that I don't actually want connection. And if someone hurts me, I just devalue them, right? The secure person, they're probably just really busy. I'm sure they'll get back to me at some point. If I don't hear back from them by tomorrow, I'll text them again and just like remind them that they received this text message. So, I mean, I think it also impacts like the workplace. Like when I was more anxiously attached, it affected how I was as an instructor. I felt like I had something to prove. I was more, I guess, had these like more punishing expectations of my students. Like, if you don't turn in this assignment on time, there's no exceptions, right? Whereas now I come from such more a place of love for my students. Like we're in this together. I'm here to create a situation where you feel valued, where you feel safe, so you can participate as your best self. I feel more calm, teaching other people. I'm more playful as an instructor, right? Because when you access these feelings of safety, all these behaviors tend to come out. Whereas, you can probably see like your boss, your colleagues, right? How some of these internal working models, these templates that they have also affect, your micromanager boss who's very anxious, right? Your avoidant boss who you have an issue and they're just kind of minimizing you. Like it really just does shape, I think, really everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Marissa. This next question comes from Marlene. How can I support an anxious person when they want more from me than I'm comfortable giving?
So this anxious person, what's their underlying need? Their underlying need is like, reassure me that I'm loved, right? And they're telling you how to do that in all these different ways. Some of them, those ways that are just too much, right? Like they want you to like cancel all your plans and show up for them at the airport when you have other things that are going on, right? Or, there's just all of these, they might ask you to like pick up something from them after you've had a long day at work and you're really tired, right? It's not balanced. They expect you to fulfill their needs, even when that comes as at the cost of their own needs, right? But fundamentally, you can both set a boundary in a loving way. So fulfilling that need for them to be reassured that they're loved and it's being expressed through all the things they're expecting of you. But can say to them, I'm not able to pick up dinner for you at this time, but, I just want to let you know that like, I appreciate you reaching out and it's always great to hear from you. And like, I wish I could be more helpful, but just like at this time, I'm really tired, right? The boundary doesn't have to be like, no, absolutely not. The boundary can be like, I can't do this now, but I also want to remind you that I do really love you and I do really value you at the same time.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Marissa. Next question comes from Andy. Do you see any relationship between attachment style and introversion/extroversion?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think I don't know if I'm remembering this right, that there was a small like link between like introversion and avoidance, right? Because you tend to try to withdraw from other people. And I don't, but if that link was there, if I'm remembering that right, I think it was very, very slight. Because they're different, right? Like an avoidantly attached person, they're withdrawing out of like fear and threat, whereas an introverted person is withdrawing for like energy. It's more of an energy issue than a feeling of like threat or unsafety when someone comes too close. So I think there are these differences, right? Whereas like an extroverted person, I don't know, right? You could think maybe an extroverted person more likely to assume people like them, which is very secure. But at the same time, I think a lot of times extroverts are like, they have less of a reaction to like stimuli. They don't get overstimulated as much. So in some ways, extroversion can lead you to like not pick up on how someone is responding to you because you're just like able to put yourself out there and you're thinking about revealing yourself. So I think in general, I think if there is a link, it's quite small, and that no matter whether you're extroverted or introverted, you can display these different types of attachment behaviors.
Thank you, doctor. And then next question comes from Sue. Does attachment style have any correlation to autistic people? Example, Asperger's syndrome, etc.
Man, that's a really, really good question. And I feel like I wish that I knew a lot more about this. And I think anything that I would share about this would be more of speculation. And I don't want to speculate because I think this is a really important topic, but thank you for your question. I think it is really important.
Awesome. And then this question comes from, let's see, Allie. I hope I'm saying that right. But she asked, they asked, can you ever distinguish which side the issue in the friendship is coming from, especially speaking to a friendship that clearly has an anxiously avoidant pair?
Well, if it's anxious and avoidant, it might be coming from both sides. And I think so. There's this interesting thing. Eli Finkel, he's a researcher, and he does this intervention with couples where basically you talk about the fight, but you use your first name. So instead of saying like, I did this, they did that, you say Marissa did this. Eleanor responded by XYZ. And what that activity does, this third person activity, is it gives you a more secure perspective, because the secure person is good at perspective taking. They're thinking about your needs and the other person's needs at the same time, and they're trying to balance the both of those. So what I would say is, like, I don't know, if you try to perceive the fight as like a third party, and you could try the third person activity, like Marissa did this and Shaylon responded like this, right? That is going to give you some insight as to like what's going on in the dynamic, because fundamentally, like, we have this finding across all of the friendship research that when we predict how our behaviors are coming off, we are off and we are cynical and we are negative, right? Like, for example, I talked about we're less likely to be rejected when we share affection, we think it comes off as more negatively than it does. We think it comes off more awkward than it actually does. People actually receive it a lot more positively. When we set a boundary, we think that people are more upset than they actually are, right? So there's this way that when we're trying to perceive reality and we're part of that reality, we have this self-defense mechanism that kicks in and makes it really hard to predict things. So, for me, I have trouble sometimes asking for support from people. So I've literally started to ask myself, what would it be like if this person asked for support from me? Because I know that's going to make my prediction more accurate, right? And so any ways that you can like take yourself out of the equation, whether that's the third person method or whether that's like, what if my friend came to me with this problem? Like, what would I think if my friend came to me with this problem or with this issue can help you develop that larger lens and figure out maybe more of where the problem lies.
Awesome. And then we are at time today. Thank you so much for everyone.
Bye. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much to Dr. Marissa for your time. Make sure you guys all go follow her and purchase her book as well.
See ya.
And then we just want to share a couple slides to wrap it up and end. Meetup is now on TikTok, so please go check it out and follow us. We post really fun, engaging content you don't want to miss out on. It'll be popped in the chat as well. And then we also have a podcast, Keep Connected, with our CEO, David Siegel. David talks with Meetup organizers as well as thought leaders in the community space. You can scan the QR code right here and give it a listen. And then as a reminder, you can view a recap of this event in a few days. It'll be on our Community Matters blog. It'll be dropped in the chat as well. Thank you so much again for everyone for joining us. And again, lastly, thank you to Dr. Marissa again, and have a great day, everyone. Thank you.